All right, today we're going to unpack a really foundational story from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what they call the restoration of the gospel. We're going to walk through the narrative just as it's laid out in one of their own pamphlets, so let's dive right in. Everything we're about to talk about really boils down to this one big question. It perfectly sets the stage for a story about something important being lost, and then, eventually, being found again. This is the whole idea behind the material we're looking at. So, to really get a handle on this whole restoration concept, we've got to start by looking at a historical pattern that the pamphlet describes, a pattern for how God has communicated with people throughout time. First things first, we need to be on the same page about what the word prophet means in this context. It's not just someone who predicts the future. A prophet is described here as a teacher, someone who gets direction or revelation from God, and someone who holds God's actual authority to act, which is called the priesthood. This idea is absolutely crucial for the rest of the story. The source then lays out this recurring cycle, this pattern that it says happens over and over again. It goes something like this. God calls a prophet, people listen and are blessed for a while, but then they eventually reject the prophet and the teachings. That rejection leads to a loss of that divine authority, and the whole cycle has to start all over again with a new prophet. And that rejection, that turning away, that leads to a really key term here, apostasy. The pamphlet defines this as more than just a disagreement. It's a complete abandonment of the gospel, and the direct result is that the priesthood authority is lost from the earth. Okay, so with that pattern in mind, let's see how it applies to the church that, according to the source, was established by Jesus Christ himself. So the pamphlet is really clear on this point. Jesus wasn't just a teacher with some good ideas. He actually organized a church. He chose leaders, his apostles, and he specifically gave them that priesthood authority to teach and perform ordinances, like baptism in his name. And it says he kept guiding them through revelation even after he was resurrected. And here's the major turning point in the story. The source says that after Christ's original apostles were killed, that direct line of authority, that priesthood, was broken. It was gone. So that event is what brings about that big picture cycle we talked about. This is what the source calls the Great Apostasy, a period when the original church that Christ had set up, along with its authority, was no longer on the earth. And to paint a picture of what this time was like, the pamphlet points to a pretty powerful prophecy from the Old Testament book of Amos. The famine, it describes, isn't about a lack of food or water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. Basically, a time without direct revelation from God through prophets. So you have this backdrop of spiritual confusion, of people searching for answers. And that sets the stage for our story to fast forward, like a long way, almost 2,000 years, to a young man in upstate New York. And this is where Joseph Smith enters the picture. He's just a teenager, only 14 years old, and he's surrounded by all this religious excitement. But for him, it's just confusing. He sees all these different churches teaching different things, and he just wants to know, plain and simple, which one is right. So he turns to the Bible, looking for an answer, and he comes across this verse in the book of James. And for him, it's like a light bulb goes off. The advice is so direct. If you're confused, just ask God. And that simple idea moved him to action. And that one decision to take that advice seriously and actually go pray about it is what leads to the pivotal event that kicks off this entire story of restoration. And this is what he said happened. This is from Joseph Smith's own account of what's now known as the first vision. He describes seeing a pillar of light, and in that light, two beings, God the Father and Jesus Christ. You know, he went into the woods to ask which church he should join, and the answer he got was, well, pretty shocking. He was told not to join any of them. The reason? Because the complete original gospel wasn't on the earth and needed to be brought back. And this is a really, really important distinction the pamphlet makes. We're not talking about a restoration, trying to fix up a church that already exists. This is a restoration. The idea is to bring back the original thing in its entirety, just as it was first established. So if you're going to restore the original church, you need that original authority, right? The priesthood. And the pamphlet explains that this authority was brought back to Joseph Smith by heavenly messengers, the very beings who held it in the first place, like John the Baptist and the ancient apostles Peter, James, and John. Okay, so the stage is set, there's a new prophet, and the authority is back on earth. But then the source points to something tangible, something you can actually hold as physical evidence that all this really happened. And that physical evidence? It's this book.
the Book of Mormon. It's presented as the absolute keystone of this whole restoration story.
So, what is it exactly? Well, the pamphlet describes it as an ancient record, translated by Joseph Smith. It's meant to be a companion to the Bible, telling a story of God's dealings with people who lived in the ancient Americas. Its whole purpose is to be another powerful witness of Jesus Christ and to serve as convincing proof that Joseph Smith was a prophet and that the restoration was a real event. And that brings us to the end of the pamphlet. But it doesn't just end with a final statement. It actually wraps up with a direct invitation for anyone, for you, to find out for themselves if this story is true. And it lays out a very specific method. It's a pattern that probably sounds pretty familiar by now. First, read the book. Second, really think about its message, ponder it. And finally, ask God directly in sincere prayer if it's true. The source promises that an answer will come. And that leaves us with this final question to think about. The difference between a faith being restored versus reformed. That distinction is the central claim of this entire narrative. It's the idea of bringing back something original and complete, rather than just fixing something that was already there.